Hi, everyone, and welcome to Resource Revolution, the resource management podcast. I'm your host, Kristie Robinson. On this podcast, we will discuss the real-life experiences of people in and around the world of resource management. Our guest today is Kristie Jinks. Kristie is a workforce and resource management director at Deloitte, focused on audit and assurance as a business executive with 25 years of experience working across finance, operations, and client-facing roles. Kristie is passionate about transformation and finding practical ways to improve efficiency, profitability, and sustainable business performance. Her focus is on supporting and developing teams, helping them work smarter and achieve meaningful results together. Kristie, we are so excited to have you. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me, Christine. I'm super excited to be here and to talk all things resource management with you.
Good. Awesome. All my favorite topics. So I'd love to start with how you first got into resource management. Tell us about that.
Yes, interesting. Not where I thought I would be because I didn't really know much about resource management. I didn't even know it existed. I had been in Deloitte for a couple of years working in audit transformation, and the COO at the time asked me to consider the resource management lead role for audit and assurance. And actually, I turned it down originally. I said, no, thank you. And probably because I didn't know enough about it. Then I started to do a little bit more digging around what resource management was and how I could maybe reconcile that back to my skill set, to which I thought was really interesting because with my ops, finance, project management experience, change management, and a keen eye for commerciality, I actually thought, I'm mad. I need to go back in the ring and have a conversation. And lucky for me, it wasn't too late. So I had that conversation, had a number of interviews, and was really excited to step into something that made complete sense, even though I'd actually never worked in resource management. But I could really see some of the elements that I had within my experience and capabilities that I could actually step in and do something with it. And I did have something in mind, which was, to assist the business to increase their ability to be data-led and make data-led decisions out of the resource management function. So, Christine, I've been in my role now for 6 years and I love it.
It's awesome. I love that. I love that story. Part of it, I would say, is very familiar from the perspective of how does anyone get into resource management? It's a windy road. Some people have completely different experiences. I think that will evolve over time. But I hear you in terms of not necessarily knowing what it is and falling into it and hopefully then falling in love with it. That said, you said two really great things. One was the data-driven decision-making, which is huge. I will say for anyone who's listening, those are going to guide our conversations because as our focus shifts in resource management, as it should in the future, to really being as strategic as possible, those are key. And you mentioned your skill set, right? And what you had done before, obviously had a full career, prior to moving in this role. You do hold a master's in accounting. Not everyone in resource management has been on that side, has been client serving. I'm very curious. You talked about this kind of commercial side of it. Has that helped, or is that just a completely different area of focus for you?
Oh, I think it absolutely has helped. I think having a foundation in finance and accounting in particular probably set some early foundations for me, and also highlighted an area that I was passionate about, which was profitability. I think that it's so important to be in business and drive profitability. I mean, that's why we're all in business, to ensure that, we're getting the best outcome for our clients, the best outcome for our people, and, that all actually pays for itself, because it's easy to do a lot of work and not realize the benefits of doing that. So I think it's really important to have those early conversations with our clients and make sure that there is an appreciation there for the value that the service drives. And I think that resource management is at the heart of that. When you sit in a position where you're looking at the overall cost to deliver a project, and majority of those costs sits with people. It's the highest cost. So it's really important that resource management have a seat at the table in respect of driving that profitability. So I do think my accounting background had enabled me to step confidently into a leadership role, as opposed to grow, from a graduate up into a director role at Deloitte. So I think I was in the right place at the right time with the right skills and then the right passion for driving commerciality. And I think it's something that can be easily overlooked when you're delivering hard, good work. And it's really important to bring it back to that. Equally, of course, we ensure that we drive quality through the projects that we deliver, but equally important to have that profitability piece there. I also think that translates to the team and the impact that they have all day, every day. So the people that work in my team are very passionate about having an impact, and that impact is helping the business to see what sometimes they can't see well enough in a timely way, really. So it has helped. It's given me confidence, foundation. I wouldn't say you need it to step in the role, though. But it certainly helped frame my early interest in my first 100 days in the role. What did I want to achieve? Where did I want to focus the team's time, and drive the why? Why does resource management exist? Where is its real power?
You mentioned a couple of things that I really want to highlight. Everything that you said was wonderful, but I would say the idea of driving profitability and leveraging that commercial mindset I see why you say you're very data driven, right? Because even the way that you alluded to what the value is, it was you can picture that. It's measurable. So I would say we've talked about this in general on the podcast, but that just highlights again the importance of that. The other thing that's really interesting too is your focus on your team, right? And so I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. How large is your team right now?
There are 40 in our team at the moment, and they come from various backgrounds across various levels, across various geographies around Australia, and we also have an offshore team in Hyderabad as well. So there are 40 of us. So quite a large team.
It is a large team. Let's dig into that a little bit later, but there are some dynamics there that are I really think of value for not just the resource management audience as a whole, but because of the very positive thing that's happening in our profession, which is that it's growing. That in itself can be challenging. So let's park that, because I do want to get into that. In terms of this idea related to really stepping it up a notch, right? We want to elevate resource management. You've talked about this a bunch. You said resource management really should be seen as what it truly is, right? It's a business enabler. It's not a back office function, right? So we've talked about that. What, in your view, does it actually take to elevate resource management into that strategic, high-level, boardroom-level conversation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And even in the short 6 years I've been in this role, it's changed significantly from the time that I stepped in, which was still a mature function, valued by the firm. The increase in its importance and its strategicness and alignment to business performance has increased exponentially. I think that in order to be successful in resource management, you absolutely need the support of the firm. You need the support of the partnership. You need the support of the partners. You need the support of all of the engagement managers to ensure that everybody's on board with the systems, the processes, the controls, the approvals, and how best to leverage all of that to drive, what and where we can have an impact as a reliable, trusted advisor to a forecast position. If there's a cliff coming, we want to be able to advise the business well in advance that there is one, or where there isn't one, and perhaps maybe recruitment is more important. So I think that resource management really sits as the integral enabling function that connects finance, recruitment, all the different recruitment streams from graduate, right through to our secondment pathway placements to, our surge resources to support in those times where we might not have, the workforce to support. So from a workforce planning perspective, there's so many things that need to be integrated into that discussion. So to be successful, it really needs to be top down and bottom up. And all of those enabling functions that I mentioned, and there are others, HR, talent, etc., that really need to be integrated more closely to be successful and have the right plans in place and be able to drive the most effective conversations across the business. So there are a number of factors that need to come into play to bring that all together, and it's not easy to bring such a large group of diversified enabling functions together. But I think the success for us has come from the people in our team and what they do and how they drive that all day, every day is, really inspiring.
Oh, I can only imagine having a team that sizable and managing that. We have I would say a range of listeners, whether that is global, where they're located, their level within resource management, others that are not in resource management, but either are served by, benefit from, or are learning about resource management. There are some organizations that are really just now implementing the process. There are others that are much more mature and their process has been seasoned over years and years, perhaps even decades. What you're describing is a more, I would say, sophisticated process, right? That's been in place that you're molding and shaping, improving, and there's always room for improvement. And what I've just heard you describe is this real intersection operationally on how the firm is set up to allow resource management to engage with, as you say, finance, HR. That being said, that is something that not everyone has achieved yet, and that's okay. That is a normal evolution, right? So you're going to get there. That being said, one of the top questions that I get as I get reached out to by individuals who are building a resource management organization is, how do I manage this team of resource managers? And there's a lot of nuance to that question, right? Part of it is they all come from different backgrounds, Kristie. As you said, some of them might have been client serving, others absolutely may not have been. So they're coming in with a different variation and diversity of skill set. Then you are realizing that the process on the resource management side is different. You're supporting different service lines. You've got all kinds of different expectations, and it's a different type of job. So giving them the guidance can also be, let's say, unique, right? In a case-by-case situation. And then lastly, it's how to keep that team motivated, how to train them appropriately, but how to retain them. And so as we think about your team is sizable, what are your thoughts on that? Because that's the advice that resource management leaders never get. No one sits them down and says, hey, for your profession, here's specifically the 3 things you need to do to attract and retain a resource manager in audit in this place doing this type of work, right? So again, I'm not asking you for the 3 things. I think that's kind of an elusive thing that maybe we could come up with together. But what have you found? What advice would you give to someone who is really building their team?
I really think it starts with recruitment. I think, when you're bringing somebody into a resource management team, I would say 9 times out of 10, you're interviewing somebody for a role that they really don't fully understand. Of course, unless you've come from resource management originally, then that's a different conversation, but that's actually really hard to find. As you say, it's a growing function, and the profession itself is becoming more and more recognized for the power and the impact and the influence that it can have, which is super exciting. So I think ensuring that you're having the right conversations in those recruitment initial calls is really important. I like to think that people understand what they're signing up to, but certainly some of the things that I try and unpack in those initial calls is to really get a sense of the individual's personality and their business chemistry. I think it's really important that going into resource management, you need energy. You need passion. You need to be able to influence. You need to be able to negotiate. You need to be able to communicate. Unfortunately, sometimes you'll have situations where everyone's equally unhappy with something that's happening around them, and it's really important to be able to speak to that. So stepping into a role like this, you can't be an introvert. You can't be somebody that wants to sit behind a computer the whole time and lean into data in a way that is, behind the scenes. You've got to be able to pick that data up and then take that forward, have conversations with the business and influence stakeholders from partners, down. So that can be really intimidating. So you definitely need to have confidence. Yeah. And I think that if you like puzzles, that's a good one. Problem solving puzzles. One day is never the same as another in resource management. You could spend 8 hours planning out the most perfect schedule, and of course something changes, and you win maybe a project that's not going ahead. 10 new starters, there's all sorts of things that can happen in a day in resource management that means that conceptually what you're doing is the same, but there is never one day that's the same as another. So I think, to answer your question, Christine, it's a people-led role. It needs to be something that I try and understand, that individual's passion or possible passion for that space, because it'll make the job so much easier for them and for the business, and they'll be able to drive those outcomes. I think what's tricky is, generalizing here, Christine, but, you're either sort of people-led or data-led. To get the people that sit in the middle between people and data is really niche. So you really need to be able to not be afraid of numbers and not be afraid of, what those numbers or that data, that report, those insights are telling you about your workforce, to ensure pipeline, to forecast and scheduling and everything else in between. You're covering a really complex set of components, from sales, through to variance management, what's happening on a daily basis. Are we losing util? Are we gaining util? Is it translating to revenue? Did we meet our monthly target? You have to still be comfortable in that space to be able to, read, translate, transpose, and have conversations. So I think that and it's hard to always, recruit those that are always going to suit, but I have a pretty good track record of that. And I do think they're the things that I look for that means that they will enjoy the role, and then therefore the retention of those people, will be a lot longer, which is, the goal. I think it takes at least 2 years to understand resource management. So it's not an easy onboarding into resource management. There's a lot that you need to absorb. I'm sure you're fully aware of that. Just a gamut of things.
Oh, absolutely. That was beautifully said. Out to me. I love, you said business chemistry. I've never heard that before, and I love that. That is such a perfect way to describe this sort of squishy thing that you are looking for, probably in almost any profession, I will say, but certainly within resource management, it's not something that is easy to assess without kind of digging into a conversation and almost watching that person in action. Now, while I will say that is 100% accurate in terms of how I would describe it and what is necessary to be successful in the role, I would say it's equally hard to assess that in a 30-minute interview, right? And so
Absolutely.
the other point that you made that I think is so important, we talk a lot in the resource management space about being data-driven and having the opportunity to either advise or make decisions based off of data. But I do think it's important here to make a clarification around, Kristie, what you just said, which is essentially that being data driven does not mean being behind the scenes. That those are not the same thing. And that's a really important part, because I have seen in my experience, and I don't want to, speak for you, but there are people who are super skilled from a data perspective, but if they don't have that other piece, as you call it, business chemistry, where their intention is to use that information to then engage with people and tell the story behind the data, this is not the job for them, right? So I think that's a really, really important point. And now a word about our sponsors, Dayshape. Do you ever feel like your team spends more time managing spreadsheets than getting actual work done? If you're a strategic leader in a professional services firm, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Say goodbye to the chaos with Dayshape. Dayshape is an AI-powered platform that takes the stress out of resource management. Imagine scheduling, planning, and staffing all being handled in one smart system that actually understands your business. Sounds too good to be true? Believe me, I dreamt of having this type of technology when I was a resource management leader. It's like having a superpower for your firm, boosting productivity, profitability, and even employee happiness. Plus, it seamlessly integrates with your existing tools, so there's zero disruption. Do you want to see the magic in action? Check out dayshape.com and see how your resource management function can be elevated to a more strategic position. Trust me, your team and your CEO will thank you. I get this question a lot. Is there a job description? What can I look for? How do I assess this? I hired someone. I thought they would be great. They turned out not to be the right fit. I made a hiring decision and that person has blown me away. The business is just in love with them and they're making all these really strategic decisions, but it happened by accident. How can I replicate that? And so what I would say is take those examples that Kristie just gave and turn those into your interview questions. Right? So you can take those qualities, right, those behaviors that she's described and say, can you give me an example of a time that you X, Y, Z? And is that going to guarantee you, perfect success 100% of the time? No. So please don't come after me if you do that and you don't you don't get the result that we're hoping for, but I think it'll get you a lot closer. So thank you, Kristie. I thought that was really helpful.
No problems at all. No, I think you're right. It's it's an interesting mix of skills and capability, but I think originally and starting in roles like this, you need to want to be there. You need to not fear the unknown. You need to be able to get in front of conversations and build yourself a true consultant role, and then take the data with you and help the business understand the so what. I think often when I look at something, if I can't see the so what, we need to dig a little bit deeper. What are we saying? What's it telling us? What's the action? What do we need to do? It can't just be a whole heap of data that you put in front of somebody. It needs to be broken down into some really short, sharp steps on what they need to do. So it's taking the confidence to take all of that huge data sets and converting it into a really simple so what are we doing here and what does it mean, and what are we driving to? So heaps in it.
Could not agree more, and appreciate you coming on that little sideways journey with me around talking about the team. And the reason I did that is with such a sizable responsibility of I would say, very large resource management function, as you describe, it cannot possibly be successful without the team. Now that you've got this and you can organize yourself, right? And there are so many people I know that are listening that are thinking, yeah, that's kind of where I am right now. And now please help, where do I go from here? Now, I think with that in mind, we can start thinking about there's this power and sort of this machine that this group makes up, right, of a resource management function. That coupled with a couple of the broader, not resource management trends, but I would say business trends that I am hearing, seeing, talking to people about, they're big right now happening in the resource management space. There are things like major consolidations, private equity coming in, mergers, major mergers, offshoring, whether that is the beginning of an offshoring journey or a more mature offshoring journey that still needs to be managed, maintained, operated. And the entire idea, and you mentioned this, workforce planning, workforce transformation. So do you feel that environment is different and has changed over the years? Sometimes I wonder, is there a lot going on, or is there always a lot going on and this is
I think there's always a lot going on. I have the privilege of working in a Big Four, and change is constant.
right?
The amount of changes that exist just within our own organisation and how we're shaped and how we're grouped in order to go to market, and how sometimes that has to change in order to suit the market. Resource management needs to be agile enough to move with the business. And I think that change is constant. And that's why often, getting back to the sort of the recruitment conversations, not everyone's comfortable in change. And I have a particular passion for transformation and change. I think that's when I operate at my best. I find it stimulating, but that's not for everybody, because it can be unsettling. It's filled with ambiguity. But what I love about it is that you're constantly refining and aligning to the business and helping them drive where they need to go. And ultimately, that's aligned to business performance. So, if you're not there, then you're not with the business, then you're not really enabling the business the way a resource management function should. But it does require people, because you can have the best sets of data, you can have the best systems, but if you don't have the right drivers, then, you're not going to be able to get there as fast. As you said before, you'll get there, but you might not get there fast enough. The train might have already left the station, and a lot of the business is being taken care of, and resource management are catching up. I'd like to think that we try and attempt to align ourselves with the business and work as fast as they do and change as fast as they do. So I'd say change is constant. We're constantly changing the way we do what we do, but ultimately the foundations of resource management don't change, which is what I love. And how we go about deciding where our focus areas are also depend on business performance, new markets, new alignment, new teams, new businesses, new people, new clients. So it is a fast-paced enabling function, and it's the people in the team that drive it. I think, why do I love my role? I love it because of the people that I work with. I'm very privileged to work with some super, super humans. They love what they do. They're passionate about it. They're able to make an impact. They become and align themselves as business partners to a host of many partners across a Big Four, and a partnership model is particularly tricky to manage because you've got a lot of partners, whereas, in a proprietary limited company or, what have you, where you have maybe more structure around less leadership, in a partnership you have more leadership, and that means more good ideas, but it also means you need to, really focus on what matters most and go hard after those things, because otherwise you can do 100 things, but if you do them not well, then you're not going to get very many places. So really important to focus on those key areas and go hard after those. But it's the people in the team that drive it, and we couldn't do what we do without them. So yeah, they're my favorite people.
So I love that. Let's dig into that. There's, as you described, there's this intersection between people and profit, right? And I can see that it's very rewarding to you to know that you're driving both of these people, I'd call it engagement, maybe, outcomes, as well as commercial outcomes. You describe this balance, right? Where you're focusing and at times having to prioritize different things. There are the, let's call it, more profit-driven, more financial-minded, right, outcomes. There are targets. We're trying to meet those targets, and we know this. How do you, and what is it like to have that with the other aspect that I know I'm hearing you say around resource management and the influence that resource management can have over things like overall people outcomes? So tell us more about that specifically. What does that mean to you? Is it employee experience? Is it retention? Is it,
well,
how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean it's super important and often more important because people are your business. So, if your people are not happy with the projects that they're working on and the clients that they're working for and the type of work that they're doing that aligns to their career and their aspirations, then, we haven't really got that right. So, to be truly people and skills led, we need to be absolutely across our portfolios and the people in them so that we understand where their strengths are and where their assignments should be. Because profitability is one thing, and I know I've spoken a lot about that, but people are just as much and equally important, if not more, than the profitability, because if you take care of your people, the profitability should come. But I think resource management are in that nice sweet position to be able to support both. And I think that when you can have an impact on someone's life, like we make decisions about people's careers. I mean, that's their life, that's their livelihood, that's what's going to help them get to their next, you know, career aspiration or gain a skill that they didn't have before. Or so we make really important decisions all day every day, and it's so important to have that consultation back with the business, to have the right system that can help systematize what we need to know and need to know fast, because we need to be making these decisions really quickly. I mean, you could win a really large contract quickly and have to find 100 people in a week. It's huge, but you want to make sure that we're finding the right people. And I know it's a bit cliche, you've probably heard it 100 times before, but finding the right people for the right jobs at the right time is really important. But it's the influence that we have that deeply drives what we do and what we care about, because it's helping those people in the business build their capabilities, work on the projects that they want to work on, and build continuity into what they're doing so that they can grow from strength to strength. So, people and people-led decisions are just so important, and they drive great outcomes for the firm. And that's why clients keep coming back, because, we can put our best people forward into those roles. And there is no better feeling when you make another human feel good about what they're doing and where they're going, right? So
you just perfectly encapsulated what for many of us in this space is the beauty of it. It's the challenge is the same as the reward. It's the thing that makes it hard is the thing that makes it awesome, right? And so
absolutely.
I I hear that, as you're describing that. I do want to really point out something that I love that you said, this idea of systematizing what we do. Huge. Okay, so that is how you start to think strategically in resource management. So if you think about what Kristie just described in terms of systematizing, that could be many different things. That maybe that's technology, maybe that's process, maybe that's the way we communicate with one another, maybe that's the way that we engage in a very operationally excellent way, right, within the organization or our team. But I would venture to say, and Kristie, tell me if you agree with this, that this idea of systematizing whatever that is in whatever form would then allow you to use your word, be agile, right? Because you're then focused on what you need to be. You're directing people, right, on what they should be focused on. And it seems to me, and tell me if you agree with this, that would, the nature of that type of approach would influence, I think, both the people and the profitability in my
absolutely.
perspective. Okay.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I love what you said before. I think, if it wasn't hard, then, everyone would do it. And I kind of like that. I like that we work in a complex enabling function that that supports the business and our people just as much equally as the other, because the impact that drives and, the reward that the team get in relation to that is super cool. So it isn't easy. It is forever changing. There's always something to do. The to-do list is, never ticked. There's always 100 things that we need to be jumping into. But when you're passionate about it, you enjoy it and you can see the impact. And I think you used this word before, measurable. Measurable excites me, absolutely, because it's nice to be able to say we did this thing and this is what it translated related to, and, this is the impact that it had. And then, it's always nice to put a dollar against that if it's a savings, because I do think that resource management
Absolutely
drive that 100%.
Yeah, I mean, you described that very well, and I'd like to flesh out something that you just described. So we talk a lot, right? We say profitability, and generally everyone knows what that means. What I think is less distinct is specifically how to drive profitability, how to measure it, and how to articulate what that means. So for those that are listening, when you describe profitability, where do you see, for example, some untapped opportunities for firms when it comes to profitability through resource management? Someone's out there and they're trying to prove the value of their resource management team. Given that you systematize, right, a lot of your processes, what are some areas that they can focus on, that they can look into?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think two areas sort of stick out to me, and coming from a resource management lens, where are practitioners, well, let's go back a step. So professional firms have a huge amount of resources in the firm delivering a huge book of work. There's a lot that can go well, and there's a lot that can go off track when you have so many people within a business, and where chargeability is really important. So to answer your question, Christine, I would say practitioner utilisation is a really important one to be looking at, because in order to meet your performance plans, we really need to understand our chargeability, which is, at the practitioner level, and that utilisation forecast that we're looking to achieve with the workforce that we have is really important, because that's what we can run up the line to provide that insight into whether or not the forecast is reliable or not. And really that comes down granular to the practitioner, their utilisation, and making sure that we're focusing on hours that may be at risk. So where we might have planned chargeability, but we didn't actually follow through with that, what do those variances look like? And did that time worked translate to revenue? Because we need to be booking that time in order to generate the revenue, which is meeting your monthly targets. So hence how the data now starts to come into the conversation. So I think practitioner utilisation is really interesting, and ensuring that you've got a view of that that's fair and reasonable for your people, because ultimately you don't also want them to be working any longer than they need to. So, overutilization is just as much as a concern as underutilization. So it's having that workforce, workload management piece right. And then second to that, it would be engagement variance, where your engagements have X amount of people planned on those, and you want to make sure that you've got the right leverage and you've got the right people at the right time in order to drive to profitability, because ultimately that's what makes up the cost of the job. So making sure you've got that right to start, and that's being managed from the start of the project to the end of the project is really important too, because sometimes you can set out with the best laid out plans, but with a number of changes, you can easily erode that original position, or not manage it well enough where you've got overutilization, which is equally important for resource management to always keep their eye across, where are people working, how long are they working, and making sure that there is that fair and equitable distribution of portfolio work. So there are so many things to keep your eye on, but they're just a couple of examples, I think, that make a real difference to bottom line and, more importantly, people and their experience.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. People that I know that have been successful in the resource management role, that's how they talk about it, right? They're like, well, there's the data piece, but also there's this, and then there's the people, but also there's this, right? It's this huge, it's constant balancing. You never want to, maybe this is the way of saying it, is if you want to be successful as a resource management leader, you have to be able, don't tilt too much in one direction. Do it because you have to, but then go back and look at it from another perspective. It's almost like you've got these two people, right? Like on your shoulder being like, look at this, but don't look at it too hard. Look at this, so that's how you do it correctly. So I think we have
a joke in the team where we often say pivot, pivot,
Yeah.
pivot.
Well, that's exactly right. It's
Yeah.
you're going down some path. And that's why you say, right, if you're the type of person that gets excited and stimulated by a little bit of change, that's why this is good for you. If you became uncomfortable every time that happened, you are going to really have a hard time. It's not going to be a fun job for you. You're going to be anxious all day. So I love that. I was going to ask you what superpowers, and what areas of focus that you think resource managers need to be successful. But you just told us, right? So part of it is what they need to have in the first place when you're interviewing. And the other is how they need to be able to operate. Not just today, but what we're seeing is this huge, fast-paced dynamic. And it's only going to become, I would say, amplified through the disruption in every area, AI, tech, people, and what's happening, university hires. I mean, there's so much going on. So I will skip that question and not make you reiterate exactly what you just described, but I will ask, we have a number of people, as you know, that are really wanting to grow and progress in their careers in this space. So let's talk about some lessons. What advice would you give to someone who really wants to make an impact within resource management, keeping in mind what you already described? And I'm going to link this. This is funny little trick I'm playing here. So we usually ask these two rapid fire questions kind of at the end of our podcast of our guests. Think about that in the context of perhaps a really good piece of career advice, maybe that you'd received that you'd want to pass on.
I think that I could firstly say that my own personal experience would be relationships. I think relationship management is key to success in anything that you decide to do or set your mind to. I think that in order to achieve and have an impact in resource management, given the complexity of the landscape, the constant change, you want to be in a position where others will support you, others will work with you, and maybe even change how they think to help you get across the line, what needs to get across the line. So I think that doing it smarter and not harder, for me, is about relationships. And where I see team members excel, it's those that have exceptional relationships in the business, but they have consciously made an effort to build that, whether that's, face-to-face in the office, which, after COVID has changed a lot of our behaviours and practices and going to work. And someone like myself, who's a little bit older, I had already built a number of relationships in the business. So, from where I sat, it was a lot easier to maintain those and then grow the additional. But for others that have started post-COVID, that's a space that has to be consciously more worked, because we have this flexibility, which is awesome, but it also comes at a cost if you're not focusing on your relationships. So I think, to do a great job in resource management and to do it a lot easier, you need to build the right relationships around you and influence others. And then you're building yourself into a role that's more consultative. And, as I said before, the second piece would be really making sure that you don't go it alone, that you're always consulting, because no point, running around the corner and no one's with you. Best to always make sure you're consulting with the business, because what they want is more important than what you want. And what they see is more important sometimes than what you see. But when you bring it together and you have that consultation, which is the don't go it alone piece, then you'll find that, you'll get where you need to go a lot faster. You'll have the right outcome, and not pretending that I always say to my team, don't pretend. If you don't know, you don't know. Our job is to get in the room and find out, so we take everything that we know and everything that we see, and we start somewhere with a recommendation on what we think needs to happen. And that might not be where we finish, but, starting somewhere is really important. So being brave and really.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, no, I love that. That's a huge takeaway. Agree. Last question. Would you be willing to share a mistake that you made in your career and what it has taught you?
I think when I said consultation is really important, it's because I think I've made a mistake in not consulting. And I retrospectively thought at the time that was so easy to pick up the phone and have that conversation. And it was a hard conversation to have. And now my mantra is make sure you have the hard conversations early, because it's easier to have a hard conversation in the moment early than retrospectively try and unpack, unpick and fix and then build your relationship again with that individual or situation. So I also think be brave enough to go back in and say sorry when sorry's due and own that mistake. So accountability is really important. And I think if you're genuine and you own it, people will always help you. But I think if you pretend and you're not authentic, you won't get where you need to go. So I do think that don't go it alone, consult, have the hard conversations early, have them authentically, and you'll get where you need to go.
I hear you. Thank you so much. That was super, super helpful. Kristie, it has been so good talking with you. Thank you so much for joining and sharing our story with us. And with that, we will wrap up our conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please help others discover our show. So follow, like, or subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Resource Revolution.